So I bet you're wondering what this diagram actually looks like in code. Well, let's start with just taking a look at this particular component, our final outbound list view. Here I have a view XML that is going to describe my layout for my activity. And as you can see, this item here corresponds with this view XML piece here. Notice I've named it. That's going to be very important because I'm going to have to reference it. Also note that these items are not actually what the list view looks like. It's just to help you know that this is indeed a list view and not something else. Okay, so now that we've got this associated with this, let's take one more component up, the adapter. Now the adapter is the thing that the list view is going to communicate with. If you look in my code over here, list view activity, and my onCreate method, I've gone ahead and got a reference to the list view, and then I have this array adapter that I'm creating for code. That piece of line of code right there is what corresponds to this. So if we take a look at our array adapter when we create one, the constructor itself takes a context, which allows it to talk to the screen like any other UI element, a resource, which is an int, and that's going to actually be the row XML that we are going to use as a template. And then there's many different types of method signatures that will take various types of lists or arrays of objects, which it will use to then assemble. Now, the array adapter object that I'm using right now is an array adapter. They all kind of extend from different types of adapters, mainly base adapter. But this one specifically is designed for us to give it a context, a row XML, and then just a simple array. So I'm going to give it an array of strings for my piece of data. If you see here, we have this, which is passing in the actual activity. And then we have this next part here, Android r.layout.simplelistItem1. Well, what is that? Because our row XML looks like it's called row.xml. Well, Android comes with a bunch of default kind of row XMLs for us to satisfy simple tasks. So if you type android.r instead of just r and type layout, you can get all these other kind of views that we normally don't actually see compiled into our layout folder of our code. In this particular case, we're going to use simple list item 1. Lastly, we have our data, my string array. Well, where did that come from? That came from right here. There's two sets of data that we have here. One is going to be used in some later videos, but this is the one we're working with right now. Okay, so we've identified that our adapter here is here. We can identify that this row XML is somewhere in the system, and that's the component here that we need. And we have my string array, which is an array of strings defined here, which corresponds to, of course, our data. So, after getting a reference to the list view, and creating an adapter and plugging those three components in, again, the context, the row, and the actual data that we want to use, we can call this method called setAdapter. SetAdapter just takes an array adapter object. Actually, it'll take many different type of adapter objects. But this one, we're going to just make sure that before we call that method, we don't have a null object. You just call setAdapter, and that's what actually is this part of the process here. This is the actual plugging in the list view to that particular machine. Lastly, I've went ahead and created a on-click listener. That allows me to put a listener on our list view to actually say, hey, when somebody actually presses one of those items, what am I going to do? I can actually get from there, if you see this expanded, this int I that will be the position of where it is in the list. So I'm going to go ahead and run the code. And as you can see, it runs, and we have ourselves a list view. It's just a list view showing those strings. Now when I press on one of these particular items, this listener will be called, and its position in that long list will be passed in as I. And that's how I can reference different objects and do things with my data that will actually be useful in some way. And as you can see in our logcat, if we pull this up, we'll see that it is indeed logging those particular strings to the log.